behalf of Bright House, I'd like to welcome everyone to today's luncheon. Really looking forward to meeting with Brian. You know, Brian and I have a lot of things in common. You know, obviously, fantastic first name. That was good. We're both bloggers. His blog, which he started as a freshman, TV Newser, was purchased by Media Bistro. Mine was never made enough money to even purchase coffee in a bistro. Like, it was not good. It was not good. But both have journalism backgrounds. He wrote for the New York Times. I wrote for my community college paper. So had a half scholarship. It was great, one semester. Here's one, books. He wrote the New York Times bestseller, Top of the Morning. And I read it, well, 60% of it on my Kindle up here, on the way, but it's really good. Really recommend it. TV, he's on TV, and I have been interviewed once on Bay News 9, our local Tampa cable. Anyway, let's go. I want to really, introduce Brian here. It's a distinct honor for me. I really look forward to hearing him speak today. He is the host of CNN's Reliable Sources on Sunday mornings and CNN's senior media correspondent. Please join me in welcoming Brian. Thank you. Yeah, this was great. Yeah, and we decided to do this as a question and answer. So, thank you for the opportunity, Brian.
Thank you. Thank you for reading 60%.
60. I will get there.
That's more than most reviewers read.
I think I'm at 61 now. I've been reading it at lunch as we've been talking and skimming through. So
I can spoil the ending.
No.
Ann Curry does not come out well at the end.
All right. So let's start. What was the journey like going from a blog to the New York Times? Can you kind of give a little background on that?
Yeah, it was a lot easier than I expected it to be. I created this blog in college my freshman year because I was obsessed in a positive way with cable news, with CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, and it became this perfect college job, really a hobby. Well, I didn't think of it as a job. I didn't think of it as a business. I think if I had, I wouldn't have enjoyed it so much. But the Times wrote a story about me my senior year, and then that story made some people think maybe we should hire this guy and have him blog about television for us. So they brought me on board in 2007. It was a whirlwind transition, of course, to go right to the New York Times. And I was concerned about a lot of ageism at the time. I was concerned I was going to get looked down on because I was 21 years old. It turned out people didn't care enough about me to look down on me. They weren't interested enough in me to look at me at all. So, and ultimately, I spent a couple of years with my head down, working hard, trying to learn from people like David Carr and Bill Carter. And I was blessed that I was able to gain their trust and respect over time just by writing a ton of stories. I think it was the same sort of strategy, although I don't think it was a strategy on purpose, that I had on the blog, which was sometimes quantity gets you to quality. If I write so many times, I'll eventually get good at it and get better at it and learn what I'm doing better. I don't think I made any major mistakes along the way, but I made lots of small ones. And at the Times, by writing 400 stories a year, I got to learn how to be a newspaper reporter.
That's great. So, I've heard you called, and I would agree with this, the embodiment of new media. I mean, you really are. You have 227,000 Twitter followers. You have a great following through your blog, and then you worked in New York Times, now CNN. How do you think, and this kind of, I think, really appeals to the room, how do you think companies are going to handle their communicators potentially becoming a brand in themselves?
Right. I don't think the companies have any choice. So they should embrace it. They should lean into it because eventually they're going to have to. And the ones that do sooner will be benefiting, will be having the advantage. And I guess one specific example of this is making announcements on Twitter or on Facebook as opposed to a press release, or tweeting out the press release. To me, that's the most logical thing in the world, and is one of the best ways to get people like mine's attention. Best way to get our attention, because that's where we're living already. I suppose it's the corollary to a media company trying to reach an audience. You go where the audience is, and if they are on Facebook and Twitter, that's where we have to be also.
No, absolutely.
I think the personal brand, institutional brand thing, it was an issue at the Times when I was there. It's less of an issue at CNN because television networks in general are more driven by personality, by people watch people. Right? So it's something that's more comfortable to a CNN than to a New York Times. But I saw the Times over my 6.5 years ago there grow much more comfortable with the idea of personal brands. with the idea that you can bring in a new audience by having your reporters and your editors tweeting and Facebooking and going on television and writing books. It was an evolution that's still going on. They'll be even more comfortable 7 years from now, but 7 years ago versus now, big change.
How do you think the established writers, David Carr, things like that, how have they embraced using Twitter and social networks for themselves? I know in your book you mentioned that Matt Lauer was very resistant to it.
Yeah, which was unfortunate, and eventually he came to accept Twitter, and I think a lot of times someone's tweeting for him, but at least he has an account. Brian Williams at NBC has been resistant to it too, and he actually has some arguments against it that are interesting and worth debating. But for the most part, to the extent that Twitter and Facebook and all these other things that we may or may not use every day humanize us, they are a huge net positive. Despite all the risks that exist with them, they humanize us. They make us more normal and human and real and relatable and reachable. And there's so many benefits to that. I've started saying on my show every week when I do my annoying promo where I say, tweet me after the show. I've started saying, and I mean it, I say, your feedback makes us better every week. You got to say that. You got to explain to people why I want you to send me send me feedback and actually act on it. So the other thing I try to do on the program every week, Sunday, 11 a.m., get a quick plug, is show the viewers tweets on air, put them on screen, read them, and in some cases say, we are doing this segment because of this audience comment. And because I think you got to close the loop. You can't just ask for the feedback. You got to show them you're actually using it. And I think that's part of the maturation of social media and versus the rest of the media.
No, I couldn't agree more. I mean, doing social media support, and I think most of the providers in here are doing that. And you have to be able to not only aggregate it and bring it in, but you have to be able to act on it. No question about it.
Right.
How do you? Because you see different programs reading negative tweets. Are you ever tempted to read some of the really inflammatory ones on the air?
There's been times where I've edited out the curse words when I've read them on air. I had a moment when I was right now we're taping the show on Fridays. It makes the show a lot better, I think, because we can fit more stuff into it if we tape it on Friday. But back when in February I was doing a live show and I had two people debating, and it was basically a debate about how terrible MSNBC was about something they did on Twitter. And my Twitter account started lighting up during the segment. People saying, I don't think they did anything wrong. I think they were right on. And I realized we didn't have that voice on the show. We only had two versions of they're the worst ever. So it was wonderful at the end of the segment to say, I see a lot of you pretty upset with me right now. I see a lot of the angry tweets that I couldn't read them because there were a lot of curse words, but it was good to be able to work that point of view into the show at least in some way.
Yeah, and you're listening.
I think TV's come a long way in the last few years about you working in social media on screen. It's become much less staged and manufactured and much more natural.
Right, and I think people can tell when it is that natural interaction.
Yeah, and by the way, Twitter's not that important, right? I mean, the vast majority of the American people don't use it and don't want to use it and never will use it. And I just add that caveat because I have to remind myself of that sometimes.
Right.
Facebook is so much more important, and I wish we could figure out better ways to unlock the value of it, and I think we will eventually. Twitter is important to me because it's a media chat room. Everybody else in the media is chatting in real time, and thus I want to also. But I try to balance myself when thinking about it, because even though it is very important, it's not the end all be all, I guess.
How much do you communicate with your fans on Facebook?
I try to reply after the show to comments. You get to the point where there are certain people that are never going to be persuaded, so you realize at some point not to try to persuade them anymore. But I at least try to respond to the comments I see. I think it's just so much harder to surface those comments on Facebook. If they're posting to their private wall about what they think of reliable sources, it's hard to find it. So you got to find ways to get them onto our own pages or onto my own page and comment there instead.
And that'd be the same thing for programmers and for distributors.
Yeah, but I am seeing when something gets trending, and when I'm posting about a topic that's trending, my personal wall will light up with hundreds of people, and that for me that's the moment where I got to jump in and show engagement.
No, absolutely. So, TV blogger, you blogged on this finale of Breaking Bad.
Yeah.
Were you concerned about writing a story while not revealing spoilers, or what's the expectation of readers now? Now that there's less water cooler.
A couple days ago, I retweeted the Associated Press saying that the woman on Jeopardy had lost. And I got flack for that because the West Coast hadn't seen it yet. I was like, blame the Associated Press, not me. But I do think it's a real issue, and with Breaking Bad, thankfully I didn't have to, I was tweeting, but I didn't have to write a story the next day, so I didn't have to make the call. I think in general we have to respect the audience on these things, and putting warnings at the top, et cetera, are perfectly reasonable things to be doing. I think the water cooler trend, though, will gradually move toward on-demand, and we'll find better ways to talk about shows that are on demand, and not live. And I certainly hope so. I certainly think we'll move in that direction. I look at the world and I see two trends. One of them is massive and it's unstoppable. Even if you wanted to stop it, why would you? Which is on demand, right? Virtually everything is and will be. But I do see this interesting counter trend trying to push back. It's small, but it's there, about live. About tuning in for the finale of Breaking Bad live, or for tuning into a sporting event or a news live. I think it's a real trend, and I think it's important for social TV, but it doesn't stop the bigger on-demand trend.
Right.
And to figure out how to have a water cooler experience around the on-demand trend, I see Netflix doing it. I see others doing it. I think we'll get there. I mean, imagine a situation where I recommend to a friend a show to watch on demand, and then I find out when they're watching. That's the time I know I should message them and say, what do you think? How are you liking it? So you can still have the conversation about the show, even though you're on different schedules. And by the way, we've done that with books for decades, so we'll find ways to do it for TV as well.
It's a good analogy.
Book clubs, right? Why not have Netflix clubs? Is Netflix a dirty word here?
How many people think Netflix is a dirty word?
Am I allowed to talk about Netflix? Okay, I'm just making sure.
This guy up here.
I don't know how people feel about it. I was just there a couple of days ago to preview Orange is the New Black coming back. I don't think it's a bad word. I don't think it's a dirty word. I think it's a complimentary service. I think it's extraordinary that there hasn't been more cord cutting. I think it's such a I think all of the media reporters that are basically rooting for cord cutting are going to be so embarrassed when they look back at their stories and see that Americans aren't doing it, except because they can't afford it once in a while, and then they come back as soon as they can. I find that to be really interesting. But you like that? But I'm also rooting for Netflix because I like that on-demand model, and I'm glad that they are forcing the rest of the world to go in that direction a little bit faster than they would otherwise. So, I mean, that's my kind of looking at the world through my media reporter eyes point of view.
That's a great answer. So you have content out there, and now that I like the book club analogy, I think that's great. Do you find that your content has a longer shelf life? Because some people are still in season 4 of Breaking Bad, so they're going to be like, oh my God, what happened? And they want to see commentary.
I'm in season 4 of Friday Night Lights, and I started watching last July, and I'm determined to get to the end by next July. And I will. I will get there. And when I'm finished, I will want to go and read the threads. And I think that's incumbent on the producers of the content, whether it's the New York Times or it's BuzzFeed or it's all these TV websites, to organize it in a way where it's still relevant. Publishers, and we're seeing that with explainer sites like Vox and 538, et cetera. We're seeing new ways of organizing news that is less about the moment it's published and more about the long tail, or whatever you want to call it. And I'm glad to see that trend, because the structure of the news business, just to put out a newspaper every day or to put out a website every second, is broken. It's not the structure people want to consume the news in, for the most part. So I'm glad that we're seeing that kind of experimentation. And for TV, it's important because I agree with you. A year from now, when I finally binge on Game of Thrones, that's when I'm going to want to read the recaps. And the recaps that are still relevant years later are the ones that are going to be, or easy to find or Googleable, are the ones that are going to count.
Right, no doubt. No, Game of Thrones is one of those shows that, I go to lunch with a couple people who just it's just, they talk about it every Monday. Like, oh my God, did you see this? And I don't watch it, so I'm like, all right, but you see, you want that interaction with these shows, you really do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Homeland was one that we all watched. So it was a nice kind of. I've heard you use the word campfire before. Campfire shows.
Definitely, and as much as we're moving to an on-demand world, and that trend is unstoppable, and as much as we're moving toward a fragmented world, we all, as humans, I think, want to meet by a campfire sometimes. Not all the time, but sometimes.
So we talked about this at lunch, and this kind of, not to keep going on the point, but, I started watching Friday Night Lights 8 years after the fact. So I just finished a couple months ago.
Yeah.
Loved it. Thought it was great, but I kind of felt cheated by not being able to go to anybody and say, did you see what happened to Tim Riggins? That was amazing. Like, I went to a friend of mine, and he was like, wasn't that show on like 7 years ago? Like, what are you talking about? I think I watched it. I don't know.
Right.
I definitely think it's going to be interesting because I think people do miss that.
Well, if I were, who else has Friday Night Lights? Pivot has Friday Night Lights, and you could imagine, in their app, some sort of environment where everybody who just finished together could at least talk, or things like that. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of room to try out those kinds of things.
No, absolutely.
Shout out to Pivot. That was good, right?
So I want to ask if, I do have more questions.
I mean, Friday Night Lights is not just Netflix, it's Pivot, so shout out to Pivot.
If there's any audience questions, I would want to open that up at this point. I do have more questions, but no.
They'll warm up.
They will.
Right.
Yeah. You're very engaging. I found you very easy to talk.
Well, television forces me to learn how to be interested. Well, I hope I'm interesting. There's a camera in the back of the room. You have to be on, right?
Right.
And I think by being on every week with the program and by being on during the week on TV, I'm having to learn how to perform like that. You have to be it's interesting, you have to be yourself while performing. So sometimes it's like you have to be 20% more than you would be normally. And on TV, that's exactly the right amount. If you watch it, I've tried it, and if I'm 50% too much, doesn't work. It's too much. It's over the top. But if you're just a little bit more than your usual self, it works on TV. Yeah.
What's your favorite thing about being on TV? Versus New York Times versus writing.
So the difference is so dramatic, and I don't know if I should say it because I don't know if it comes across a positive or negative. But to me, the highs are so much higher and the lows are so much lower. There's a certain element of bipolar to television in the experience of it. When you're for the hour that my program is on CNN, Sunday 11 a.m., the experience is higher than any high in the world, at least no drug I've ever taken. Maureen Dowd's column this morning was fascinating, by the way, about her weed experience, but it's higher than any high ever. But then it goes away instantly. It is the most fleeting thing in the world. At 12:01, no one remembers what you did or what you said, unless you cursed, unless you made a mistake or a guest blew your mind away, right? So it's so fleeting. So it's so high, but then it goes away so fast. New York Times, complete difference. When you're on the front page, it lives forever, right? People are citing it years later. I put a quote in a story in 2008 that people are still quoting back to me. It was from a researcher who had a bunch of teenagers in a room, and a 15-year-old said to her, if the news is important, it will find me. That people consume it like a sponge, and people still quote that back to me from a New York Times story. I doubt that would happen. I mean, I've only been doing CNN 6 months. Maybe it'll happen, but it's harder for that to happen on television, which is so live, so immediate, so fleeting. So that's been my experience so far. Now, one more plug for CNN. How do you solve that problem? How do you solve that live, immediate problem? Well, this app, CNNX, that they've started to demo, I think is the solution to almost every problem I have with television news. Because for those of you who haven't seen it, it's an authentication app. You log in. You can go back in time 24 to 48 hours and see anything on the air and watch it. You can also go a little bit forward in time and see what's coming up on the shows. And then on the bottom of the screen, you get all your links. You get your photo galleries and your related videos and your articles and your bios. So it's making it into a web page, and it's time shifting and place shifting live TV, which is crucial because otherwise, as that on-demand trend happens, on-demand is where people are going to want to be. So I'm excited by that. I think every news channel will have to have it, something like it.
Right.
You're going to have to be able to go back in time 24 hours on Fox News or MSNBC, but I'm glad we have it first because I want people to be able to go back and watch Reliable at 4 p.m. if they're not around. And the DVR is not the best solution. The DVR should not have to exist today in 2014. It should be a bridge to this better future of on-demand. So I'm glad that we're figuring that out.
Cool.
Long answer, sorry.
No. So how has the reception been from morning news programs to your book, Top of the Morning?
Yeah.
I thought it was very fair, and I'm not just saying this. I thought it was a very fair. I don't think and we talked about this, I don't think you went for the easy villain, hero kind of model. Can you talk about some of the reaction to that?
Overall, I was pleased by the reactions to it. It was, of course, hard to get access at NBC in 2012 because the house was burning down, and they started the fire. So it's hard to get access behind the police lines at a point like that. Although I got a decent amount. more than maybe some people there wanted, less than I wanted, of course. And then at ABC, easier access because the house was being built and it was beautiful and it was shiny and it was new and it was winning. So that was easier. But even NBC, thankfully, didn't try to tar the book or lie or say it was wrong or anything like that, because they knew that it wasn't my fault that everything burned down. You know, they knew what had happened. And I actually think my book dramatically understated how bad it was. I think sources get more honest after your book is published. They tell you about how much worse things were than you thought, which is extraordinary to me. But that's true, I mean, for any historian. If you write about something 10, 20, 30 years later, you're going to get more of the real truth then. So that kind of sums up my experience. Lifetime is working on making it into a movie right now, a TV movie, and I'm interested to see, with a couple years that have passed, how to reflect back on what happened. You know.
One thing I think that was really interesting, and not to give too much of it away, was it was kind of the formula that TV uses as far as the husband and wife couple on TV shows. Would you ever want to be that husband? Is that something that is interesting?
Only with my real life TV wife. Well, she's a traffic reporter in New York in the morning, and I do once in a while when we're bantering at home or pretending to fight. I think this could be good TV, but no. Otherwise, I look at what I'm doing on television, and what I love most about that particular job. I mean, truthfully, the only reason why I jumped from a newspaper to CNN is that I'm covering a beat. You know, I'm covering a specific topic, and I'm in my own little way trying to be the best I can on that topic. I think it's this tension of generalists who can do anything versus specialists will always be with us. But I feel better in the specialist side. I feel, at least right now, I feel much better on that side. There was this sounds all promotional, I'm sorry. There was a full screen graphic for me when I started at CNN, and it said, "Reliable Sources, hosted by senior media correspondent Brian Stelter." And I thought, that's exactly the right idea. I have the show because I'm a reporter. I don't have the show. I have the program because I'm a reporter. I liked that frame of mind because, to me, the best shows on TV, the best news shows, are reporter shows. Shows from reporters. Jake Tapper, who still breaks news, who still has exclusives on his show. To me, those are the shows I seek out and I want to watch. So I like that concept of reporter-driven programming.
So you brought up your wife is on New York 1, right?
Yes. Yeah.
You've been on TV now 6 months, CNN. Who gets recognized more?
Oh, definitely Jamie. Definitely Jamie.
All right.
And which is how it should be. She's got hair. She's she's.
So if somebody needs to get the table, she's the one that you send up. Like, I do the same thing with my wife. She's definitely the one.
Right.
Like,
and she's the TV pro. I mean, all the things that she warned me about and told me about are coming true. And we have an "I told you so" moment at least once a week,
that's good.
which is fascinating to me. It is. We're talking about what I like about television, and it sounds like a humble brag of some sorts, but the audience is massive for these programs. CNN, there's stories written about the ratings, and I read them, and I'm like, are you kidding? There's huge audiences when you compare it to a typical newspaper story or a typical web story. There's still a huge audience for what we're doing, and that makes it even bigger than I think I realized when I was at the Times writing about CNN. So that's been eye-opening to me.
In my opinion, in terms of like really letting the facts kind of fall out and have a really good assessment of what really happened. And so there was a good story in the New York Times today that's saying like, oh, like this guy maybe wasn't responsible for all these people who died and stuff. And so how do you manage that dichotomy, especially coming from a traditional new media background where you could put out a story on your blog and then make edits and people who come would see the changes and your corrections. Right.
Well, I mean, a lot of my answer involves the internet. I think the fact of the matter is that the internet is the single best, probably best invention of our lifetimes, but it's the best way to consume news. In many ways, it's much more transparent. You can correct your mistakes. You can make clear you've made additions and all of that. far superior to newspapers or magazines or other printed media. And I think television's adapting to that. Television is having to change, and I mean everything from CNN to Fox to MSNBC to NBC, ABC, CBS, Al Jazeera, PBS, everything. It all has to adapt because of the internet. If we're getting most of our raw material news from the internet, then television has to do more of the talk. It has to do more of the debate. It has to do more of the point of view. I don't know how to stop that unmovable force, other than to say we go online for the raw material, for the facts, for the figuring out of the facts, and we have to hope that that's strong and robust. And then television ends up being the next level beyond that, the added value beyond that. And that to me is a lesson from Fox News and MSNBC, from what they've done. I love them. I mean, I watch them. I work at CNN and I love them as a media reporter because I know what I'm getting and I know I can flip back and forth and get both sides. Now, I love that CNN tries to do all of those sides as well. And that's a role that we have to play. But I guess I look at it and I don't. Am I crazy to think that I can't expect television to just do the facts in a world where that's what the internet is doing so well? Doesn't television have to adapt to what the internet's doing? That's sort of my take on it. And it's an incomplete and unsatisfying answer because not everybody's online and not everybody wants to know all the facts. They sometimes just want to believe what they're told on Fox or MSNBC. But to me, that feels like the way we're going. To me, what I see being valued the most are the point of view programs and point of view websites because people are bringing the basics with them, the basic facts with them. But I'm evolving my view on it. I'm trying to figure it out like everybody else.
Can I? Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead. Oh, who has the?
I have the mic back here.
Okay.
Amy Phillips with ESPN. I had one comment on the Netflix, earlier comment about Netflix being a bad word, and then a question. But I think as far as Netflix goes, I do think it's complimentary, and I think that what's missed a lot in those conversations is that how much of their content is from cable,
right.
From cable
right.
programmers.
Yeah.
And then the question I had is, since we're sitting in a room with people who are tasked with telling the story of cable and whether these cord-cutting, whether it's real or imagined, what do you think we're missing as far as telling that story and telling it well from a value perspective or just?
I think media reporters like me should be writing stories every 3 months that says, wait, where's cord-cutting? I mean, and that's more of an assessment of my work, not of PR work. But I actually think we should be the story the media reporter should be writing is, wait, wasn't cable supposed to be dead by now? I mean, I find that interesting journalistically because there are so many reporters and editors in newsrooms that cover this industry that are effectively rooting for it to happen and believe deep down inside it's going to happen when it's not. I was saying earlier when we were having lunch that I think part of it is technology reporters who come in from Silicon Valley or from elsewhere and don't understand television or the internet or the cable broadband business, who just believe or rooting for unbundling to happen, and they write these columns as if it's going to happen, and then they're proven wrong every 3 months when quarterly earnings come out. So I would wish for more. What's the word I'm looking like? More. I wish they'd have to follow up. I wish they'd have to be held accountable. That's the word I'm searching for. Accountability in those columns and reports. But anywho, I do think corporate communications folks can help that happen, right? Can hold those reporters accountable, can hold their feet to the fire, and make them pay attention to the reality of the business and the remarkable health and strength of it. And I believed that before I joined CNN. I promise. I mean, listen, I did. When I was weighing my decision, which was terrifying to leave the Times, I tried to debate it out in my own mind. Is it healthy? And I obviously think it is. I think the other element to me about Corp comment about reporters right now is this issue of TV everywhere not being everywhere, and what the hell is going on, and what are the delays for? And I think reporters, who are writing that story can be better aware of the delays and the reasons why. Reporters have a big role to play in that. I love tech columnists because I think they're sometimes incorrect columns do try to force TV everywhere to happen a little faster. So I think to the extent that reporters can tell stories about where we are and where we're going with authentication and why it's taken a while to get there, that can be useful. Because Lord knows I want to get there, and I can see it, but I can't go get there yet.
And that was a great question. That was exactly what I was thinking about.
The point about
next,
Netflix
so
and
that was a great
cable,
question.
I mean, it's important that so much of the programming does come from cable
Right.
channels, and that should be a line in every Netflix story, shouldn't it? It should be a.
My question is sort of tangentially related to that. It relates specifically to TV news. You know, you've heard also about how the death of the network news broadcast is coming. When you add it all up between the three, you're still looking at 20 million plus viewers per night.
Absolutely. It's another example of reporters hoping something's going to happen that's never going to happen.
Right. So my question is, though, in terms of the marketplace, you're still seeing new news networks pop up. For instance,
Yeah.
Newsmax announced that they're going to pull off a piece of the pie and try to sort of segment off of Fox News. So my question then is,
cool.
what are your thoughts about sort of the TV news business and segmentation, then connecting the dots back to what everyone does here? How can cable operators and maybe news organizations, which might have had, obviously, like any other programmer, more of an adversarial component to it, sort of work together to promote, obviously, both our products?
I don't think I'm the best person to answer it, but I'm very intrigued by Fusion and Al Jazeera and Newsmax. And I think there's one other right-wing one, isn't there? Like One America something. The fact that I don't know for sure is a problem.
The Blaze.
And then there's the Blaze. That's probably the other. That's the more important one, arguably, than Newsmax. That's already in homes. To me, this gets to that point about if the internet is providing most of my raw sources. Like I think about what I do when I wake up in the morning, and I think it's increasingly true, and it's increasingly a problem for morning TV. You look at your phone before you look at the television set. You either scroll through Twitter if you're crazy like me, or you look at your favorite news website, or you look at your email, and you get a basic understanding that nothing bad happened overnight. Or if something bad did happen overnight, you find out if it affected you, which is the main point of morning news, just to give you reassurance about your safety and your loved one's safety and whether your day is going to get ruined by something. So that comes from your phone, not from your television. So television has to be something a little different. So if you look at Good Morning America, it's more entertainment-oriented. If you look at CBS, it's more interview-oriented, et cetera. And I think that's the same idea for cable news as well. You know, Fusion is, I think the most interesting thing Fusion's doing is the cartoon shows they do, the puppets and the animation, because they're experimenting with satire and entertainment. I think Al Jazeera is a little bit different. I don't know if I should say this in a room full of people who tweet me, but I think of Al Jazeera, which I think is a really important and wonderful development, as kind of being what CNN was 20 years ago. And I don't mean that as a knock on them. I'm glad they exist. But I just don't know how many people will watch CNN from the 90s in 2014. I just don't know. We'll find out. But what I like is that there's differentiation between all of them, you know? They're all, and that's probably what's most important to communicate to consumers, is that all of these channels have a different role. Al Jazeera has live news at 11 p.m. Nobody else does. That is a great thing for them. CNN has an increasing number of taped programming documentaries that you can't get anywhere else. We know what Fox and MS are. Newsmax and The Blaze are so interesting because of the pressure they put on Fox, and because they're providing. The idea of just red and blue is such a boring and an incomplete frame. It's about so many different colors within that palette, and that's why I thought Current was interesting before it got bought by Al Jazeera, for the same reason it was putting pressure on MS. So I think that's to the extent that viewers have access to all those channels, they should be aware of how different they are. And ultimately, I assume some of those just become streaming products. I assume that Al Jazeera is not going to get in 100 million homes on a cable box, but hopefully via streaming they will, and people will have access to that marketplace of ideas. That's, I think, my answer. I hope that answers. You guys can tell I'm a big news buff, big enthusiast.
What do you think? You know, you're picking stories. You guys are writing. What would get a better story? You talked about cable telling the story, and then what would get that in front of you? What would get your attention? So many things cable does. STEM initiatives. So much giving in the community. I can speak for Bright House. I'm sure everybody else is the same way. I mean, we are involved in every little league, everything you can think of. High schools. How do we better tell that message of all the things? We live in the community. We work in the community. How do we better tell that story to where you are going to say, look, this is this is a great story.
I don't think I have a good answer. I mean, I think I don't know how that rises to the level of news coverage. Oftentimes, I think most of the answer comes from you guys creating your own content. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of the talk about on demand being this really important trend. I mean, I write kind of 3 stories over and over and over again. Every story goes back to the same trends. One is on demand. One is from few sources to everybody. Right, from 3 networks to et cetera. The third one is sources going direct, which is related. The idea of sources going direct to the public, companies becoming media companies, all companies being media companies, all politicians being media companies, everybody making their own content. And I'm guessing that's mostly the answer to the question. Getting stories out through, in my case, I'm a Time Warner Cable subscriber, through their blogs. Comcast has done a lot of that, I think, through their merger, with their acquisition, on their own website. I'm guessing that has a lot to do with the answer. I think journalists who cringe at the idea of companies making their own media, making their own news products, in quote marks, it's not the right answer. There's no way to stop it from happening. So we can either understand it, try to get ahead of it, try to figure out what our role is in that changing environment. Just to bemoan it, just to be unhappy about it is a waste of time.
What shows are you watching right now?
Not enough. Bourdain, of course, on CNN. I'm catching up on Parks and Rec. I'm catching up on Veep, Silicon Valley, Friday Night Lights we mentioned. That's about it. I would watch more on cable if it was more easily accessible on demand, and we can blame Time Warner Cable or whoever else for that.
No, I don't think we want to do that. I don't think that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys don't need to hear my authentication rants, but I would watch more on demand if it was easier.
And we only have about 4 minutes left, so I do want to open it back up to questions if there are any, because I have a few more, but I don't need to. They're not that interesting. Anyway, what's your favorite way to? You kind of went through it already, but what order do you consume news? Do you consume content through, like social?
Yeah, I mean, I wake up with Twitter, and I go to sleep with Twitter, and Twitter's in between. But I know that's not normal. I know that's not a normal use case, so I try not to read too much into it. I read the Times in print on Sunday still, although I read most of the articles online on Saturday beforehand, so that feels like a waste. I read The Atlantic in print. I read Wired in print. Everything else is online, and everything else is like a sponge. It has to come to me, which gets to that 15-year-old's comment from earlier about how it'll find me. Yeah, I think we have a mic out there.
Hi, it's Katina, ESPN. How do you get away from it all? I mean, do you ever put the device away, or do you have a rule for yourself?
Why would I want to do that? No, I do actually. I do. On my honeymoon, I actually turned my phone off and I hid it for 36 hours, which was a new record. So I'm going to try over time to keep extending that and see how long I can go without it. Other than that, I mean, short of forcibly turning it off and hiding it, I don't. But I'm assuming that when I have kids, I'll want to. I'm assuming that's when I would want to start to disconnect.
I don't know.
I can't wait. Right. All right.
I think it might get worse.
Right.
Yeah, it might be. I love my kids. I love them, but it might be quite the opposite. To be perfectly honest, like, Daddy is working. Like.
I can't wait to learn about media consumption through my kids.
Yeah, well, even you are 10
when
years
I saw,
younger than me.
yeah, when I saw a child 3 years ago go up to a TV screen and try to swipe it on.
Yeah.
I mean, it just blew my mind.
My son is 10, and he has had an iPad since he was, 4, and an iPhone since he was 2. I mean, they just know how to use them.
Yeah, I mean, forget
It's
media
amazing.
reporters. The best pressure that we can put cable companies and programmers under is the kids. I mean, that's where the pressure comes from.
Right.
for innovation.
No, it is amazing, and it's amazing how many, like you mentioned on demand, how important that is. That's everybody sees life through these devices.
Yeah.
I mean, not everybody, but that younger generation, they see these, but it's true. I mean,
absolutely.
And to a lot of people, it's not like you're working being on the phone, being connected all day. That's almost like an outlet from, it's like reading a book was. Like nobody thought, oh, well, you were reading a book, that's a waste of time. doing Twitter and Facebook and Instagram it's just it's almost like that to me.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is at this
And
point.
by making that media, I think it all makes us better, more media conscious citizens.
Absolutely.
And it's all kind of fuddy-duddy, but I think it's actually true. I mean, to see Yes All Women happen last week, that hashtag movement,
Yes.
you know, was a lot of things, and I don't want to use the wrong words to describe it, but to be able to see something come out of a mass shooting like that, where I could read people's stories in that way, you know, to me, if I had a magic wand and I could wave it over top of CNN, I would have read those tweets for on air for a while, because that was people making their own media.
Right.
Yeah.
That's very powerful. One last question. There's the. I thought that was Brian. I got him mistake. There's like 5
Brian
Brians
S. Yeah.
more important than I am in this room, and this being one of them. So it's like, you know.
Okay.
This will be good then.
This is Brian S.
Do you think that the media covers the media differently as outlets, thinking of like Abramson at New York Times, those types of things, versus news stories? So like when the media is talking about the media,
Itself.
do you think they take a different tack than?
I do, and I think in some ways it's good, in some ways it's bad. I think generally speaking, we probably overestimate people's interest in the topics, right? So that's first and foremost. And we have to be sensitive to that. On the other hand, we can make those stories into stories that matter. You know, Jill Abramson was portrayed a lot of different ways, and some of the coverage was wrong, but there were important themes underneath it. And one of the first stories I covered at CNN was the Duck Dynasty guy, mouthing off. And you can roll your eyes at that story, or you can take it to a place that's really important about what's acceptable in the public square and how our views of homosexuality are changing. Like that, we can take it to a really interesting place. So I've come to think that media coverage, we gotta sometimes make that leap to the next place, and that's where it gets really good. It's true for the mergers right now too. You can tire yourself out thinking about them, or you leap to the next step. It gets interesting. So I think it's an incumbent on the media reporters to not get bogged down in that insidery place, the place that Twitter is, and the place that many of the stories are. If you take it to where it matters for consumers, then it can be really important. And that's the lesson I keep learning and relearning and trying to teach others now that I'm at CNN doing a media show, is that we got to take it to that place where it affects people. Otherwise, it is just news for the newsroom, and we don't need a lot of media reporters to do that news.
Well, thanks, Brian.
Thank
It's
you.
been great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.